Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Coffee with Captain. This morning we are joined, Chief Mate Jeff Crosby here, Captain Jan Miles as well, and this morning we're joined by Captain Christine Cleary. And Captain Miles, you want to take us away here?
So, yeah, good morning, everyone. We have in Baltimore Harbor a dense fog. It's been a long time that I've noticed that we're now down to less than 500 feet of visibility. So, Christine, you operate a pilot vessel servicing the delivery and the pickup of Baltimore pilots, Maryland pilots. So in conditions like these, what's that like?
It's challenging, but fortunately we have really good radar. It's all about radar and AIS as well. Yeah, I'd be lost. I couldn't do it without the radar and the AIS.
Well, you wouldn't be able to go as fast for sure.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, usually reduce my speed in conditions, in no visibility. But
Right. So you're an alum of Pride of Baltimore, and you've been for some years in this service of delivering pilots back and forth between arriving ships and what have you. So in a pandemic year, has there been much of a change in your experience from a non-pandemic year?
Right. Not a ton. Shipping, international shipping is definitely still happening. I hear sad stories, initially at the beginning of the summer that the crew members on the ships, were stuck. Usually they have a 9-month or a 12-month contract and then they change out. But there were no flights. They couldn't get on a plane, or, their relief couldn't fly to meet the ship. So I know that was pretty dramatic and a bummer for them. For us, it was just kind of the, taking the precautions, wearing the masks, wore gloves in the beginning, wiping everything down, running with ventilation on the pilot boat. They actually did stop the apprentice program initially too. We have a half a dozen apprentices, I think, training, and just to limit the number of people in one spot, the apprentice program got shut down, which is a bummer for them, but it was a smart thing to do at the time.
Right. Let's get into the business of the seamanship you're engaged with when you're doing your operations. So describe the pilot boat.
The pilot boat. 53-foot overall length, twin screw, pretty handy. One of the most striking things about it, it doesn't have a railing, which is bonkers. I'm very used to it at this point. I've been there since about 2004. But yeah, there's no railing, which is crazy.
Well, you got to get on and off the boat, right?
You don't want the pilots to trip over anything. You know what I mean? The point is to safely transfer them on and off the boat. Yeah. So you don't want anything for them to trip over. So, right. We really can't run spring in terms of tying the boat up. That means we don't have any way to tie spring lines up. There's no cleats or anything midships. It's all, we have a cleat up forward and two astern, but there's no way to properly tie it up. When I first started there, one of the big hurdles was a psychological hurdle, was approaching the ships. When you're, as a mariner, that's one of the hard and fast rules, right? Is just you stay away from large ships, from large shipping, just don't go near them, in crossing situations, just give way. And then to actually set an intersecting course and approach and collide, basically run into them, was bonkers. It was a psychological hurdle to overcome, for sure, when I first started.
So after you've overcome that, even as so what is engaged, what are your thoughts and thinking regarding to coming alongside?
Thoughts and thinking, the variables I'm looking at are ship speed, how fast the ship is going. And it can make a difference, definitely, whether it's arriving or departing. And arrival in the winter in particular is heading into the harbor, which is basically heading into the northwest wind. So anything over 25 or 30 knots can be gnarly. Where the ladder is placed on the side of the ship, ideally it's midships, but sometimes it's pretty far aft. Occasionally it's pretty far forward, and that can make a difference.
What kind of differences would that mean?
It's a little more challenging. If the ship is going fast and the ladder's aft, you get you get more suction from the propeller.
That's drawing you into the ship faster than you want to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if it's up forward, you're getting repelled. It's hard to get alongside.
Believe it or not, it can be. It can be. Yeah. And on departures, more often on departures, they actually might be turning. The ship might be turning to get into the main channel if they're done with the tugs and the docking pilot has left the bridge of the ship. If the ship is if the ladder is forward and the ship is turning, it can actually make for an ugly landing. Do what it can do, but in the end, you just got to get there. And sometimes it's not pretty.
Yeah, we had an experience with Pride of Baltimore up in picking up a pilot when we used to have to take pilots with the Escamens pilot for the upbound trip into the St. Lawrence, Upper St. Lawrence. And we'd done it a bunch of times over several years, but this one particular time I acceded to their statement, which is please maintain a certain speed. And it's something like 6 or 7 knots. And in the past, I had not done that. I had forced them to slow down to our speed by us slowing down to more like 3-4 knots. And so I went ahead with it. And the acceleration, side acceleration, while they were not coming in hard in terms of angle, just because we're moving at that 7-odd knots, both of us, and that's not a small boat, that's probably twice the size of the boat you're operating. The tonnage just came in alongside, and it comes on our main channel, which you'd be familiar with, and it did a number on one of the lanyards of the main rig. We wound up changing that out just because of the way their fendering works, and it only cut half a strand of the 3 strands, but we had to change it out. So, note to self, force them to slow down, because this side velocity is next impossible to manage.
Yeah. For me, ideally, the ship I'm approaching is ideally going between 6.5 and 8.5 knots. If it's going too slow, it's actually more difficult, to hold the pilot boat alongside.
Yeah, which is where the Escamens pilot was coming from. They didn't want to go that slow because they were having those kinds of problems. But again, they're coming alongside a situation that is unique in terms of its structure. And as you know, our lanyards and the channels are in a combination pretty resilient, but not enough to allow for 6 or 7 knots of standard speed. We had to get them, and subsequently, we went with another pilot another year later, and we slowed way down. We didn't have the problem. It puts the challenge on the operator, such as you, but it was forced because of the way Pride is set up. What are kind of unique things relate to seamanship with the pilot boat and providing this taxi service that you might share with us?
Unique things about seamanship. It's the small boat handling, I guess, and being out in all kinds of weather. It's 24/7 year round. So I've definitely been crunching through ice all the way out to North Point, which was just horrible. It's violent, which is just violent. Other seamanship. It's definitely. I think it's mostly conditions.
Yeah.
So
here you are, many decades after you got started in making a career out of boats. So how'd you get started? How far back does it go? You've been on both sides of it, in the sense of being the traditional sailboat side of it and the motorboat side of it.
Yeah, no, it was an accident. It all started really by an accident. Fresh out of college with a political science degree, I wanted to go on an adventure. It's kind of a half-baked idea of being a journalist, or doing some writing eventually. But I wanted to have an adventure. And weirdly enough, on the radio in Boston, there was an advertisement for a 1-week trip on the Spirit of Massachusetts, the schooner Spirit of Massachusetts, 4th of July, including 4th of, so up to Maine and back to Boston. And it's like, that's it. I'm going sailing. And yeah. Yeah, 30 years later.
So what's been that path? I mean, okay, you get introduced to the situation, the scenarios, the options, the possibilities. How did you choose to map that path?
It kind of was a stumbling path. I ended up hanging out for the rest of the summer after I was a paying passenger on Spirit of Massachusetts and volunteered as a deckhand. And they had some excellent leadership there. And the women, kick-ass women, really made a strong impression on me. The chief mate and the third mate were women.
What year would that be?
93.
Okay, yeah.
It was, John Beebe Center and Deb Hayes were the leadership on that vessel that summer.
Right. Yeah.
So I hung out for the rest of the summer, and then at the end of the season, they were heading south, and so I just started walking around the harbor, seeing if anybody needed crew to go south, and found Lena Marie, which was a ketch rigged vessel. And they were leaving the next day. And I said, oh, I can't leave tomorrow, but I'll meet you in Newport, over the weekend. I'll meet, they were going to be staging in Newport, I think, before they shoved off. So all right, give me 3 days.
Right.
And I went home, and God loved my parents. I showed up and I said, I'm going to Bermuda or the Bahamas. I don't know the difference.
An island somewhere out there.
I'm going south on a sailboat. Can you give me a ride to Newport on Sunday? And they did it. And I mean, worse, I think it was really foggy out. The conditions weren't good. So the ship was anchored out. They couldn't even see the ship. They sent a launch in. They sent in the inflatable boat to pick me off the dock. And I waved goodbye to my parents and went off into the fog. They never saw the ship. I can't even imagine what their thought was as I waved goodbye with my sea bag. Yeah, and it was fantastic. I was, we did go to Bermuda. It was Bermuda for those keeping track, and then down to the Virgin Islands for the winter.
So how did you find yourself in a position to come aboard Pride for the first time, Pride of Baltimore 2?
That was in 1999. Actually, I had a bonkers story about interviewing for that. I was in Massachusetts, and they were getting ready. They were shoving off. It was right before the Asia trip, I believe. Or that might have been 90. When was that trip? In 98?
98. We started in 97 in the fall, late fall of 97. Headed in December, we made our departure from Baltimore, and that was so that's our departure. Got back in November of 98.
I interviewed with you, I think right before that, in which I basically did a day trip to St. Michael's from Boston just to interview you, and I don't think it worked out at that point. But then in 99, I came on as a deckhand for Rig Up and then Great Lakes tour.
And you've been back with the ship periodically how many different times and moved through the ship in what positions?
Deckhand in the summer of 99, and then bumped up to second mate that autumn for around the Chesapeake Bay. I think I did winter maintenance that winter. I did.
Was that when I built you the house?
Yeah, that's right. That wasn't the first. That was probably my second or third winter maintenance where I was like,
oh, okay.
Jan, right. I need a heated space. If I'm going to do this again, I need a space that I can heat. I need a, yeah. We built a shed inside the warehouse. That was great.
I think that's one of the first times the crew saw me roll up my sleeves and go to work. We're going to make Christine a heating shed.
There was a coffee maker and had files, paperwork in there. And it was downright civilized, a little office, heated office.
So what was the scenario that you led over those years? You returned to Pride numerous times. You must have been going to other vessels in the meantime. And what presented the interest to keep coming back?
I had a sweet spot. Oh my gosh. It was one of the highlights for me professionally of my life, was that a 3 or 4 year period where second mate on Pride is like one of my ideal jobs, frankly. So I'd be second mate on Pride, and then I'd go be second mate for Ocean Classroom, which was either Harvey Gamage or Spirit of Massachusetts. And it just professionally, it was extremely fulfilling, to do the sail training, and then for 6 or 9 months, and then come and do Pride for 6 or 9 months, where it was professional development for me, where I was just learning so much, doing the nav, just everything was a really good, it was enriching and a good educational experience working on Pride.
Cool. So how did you come to settle into your current career? Because that followed pretty closely behind your last stand aboard Pride. Is that how that worked out?
Pretty darn close. I drove actually the fast ferry in Boston for that was like a quick job, a couple of months. I needed to renew my license. And I was based out of, that was based out of Boston. So I took a couple of months to do that. And
well, let's pause that for a second. Describe that experience, because some of those vessels are huge up there in Boston.
Yeah, these were gigantic. I don't remember the passenger capacity at this point, but they were fast. It was 30 knots at night. And coming from where 12 knots was fast, was screaming fast on the sailboats. And I didn't just step in there and drive right away. I was hired as a mate, so a lot of ticket taking, counting heads and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think opening happened, and I had proved myself competent enough that they did end up letting me drive, which was cool.
What was the route? Did you have a specific route, or was there several different routes?
Yeah, no, from Quincy to into downtown Logan Airport and downtown Boston.
And Quincy is
South Shore, south of Boston.
South Shore. Okay, yeah. I've got a past shipmate of the old Pride of Baltimore who's been working there for quite some time, and he tends to do the South Shore thing every once in a while, a whale watch thing. But those vessels have changed since you were there. They've become these really huge things. Been fascinating. So that's cool. So what happened? So what happened after that?
And then I was a little bit tired of being a nomad, living the nomadic life, and was thinking about trying to figure out something else to do. And I had also met a boy. I met Brad Flurry on Pride of Baltimore too, and he is based in Baltimore. So I was motivated to come to spend time on land in Baltimore, and I did. That's kind of, and also I think it segued with winter maintenance. So doing the winter maintenance on Pride and being land based, and which was in Locust Point at that point.
Well, I can remember being very relieved that if it only took building you a warming house, that you would take the job. I can remember I was a bit desperate. So I'm guessing those things all coincided at that time.
Yeah.
That warming house, by the way, survived until last year.
Wow.
We kept that warming house around, but we unpacked it last year, and it was time to see it go.
Yeah.
Fortunately.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great idea. Well executed.
Thank you. So, we were looking around for something to do after that or during that winter maintenance period of time, right?
Yeah. And ended up with the water taxi, Ed Kane's water taxi.
Right.
Which again, I wasn't frankly super qualified. I didn't have a ton of small boat experience. I had my license, obviously, and a lot of seamanship that I had learned through the years, but really, I was fine. I figured it out really quick. Obviously, I had a tryout, interview, and they, I drove the boat around for them to watch me, and I did it fine. But I did that for about a year, and it was really great experience in terms of just all you do is, in terms of boat handling, you're just on the dock and off the dock for hours and hours and hours. And the deckhands deal with the passengers, they deal with the money, tickets and everything. You don't have to do that at all. So it's just straight up small boat handling.
Yeah, that's great stuff.
And that really was the link, the stepping stone, then to get me in with the pilots, driving the pilot boat.
So how did that apprenticeship flow for you?
With the pilots?
Yeah. I take it, well, I'm making an assumption here. I'm making a leap that may be very inaccurate. They may have hired you. There must have been some kind of introduction.
There was an interim. I think I had a 3 or 4 month interim tryout, so to speak, where I was hired, but it was conditional that it would work out. Yeah, at that point, the pilot's organization had changed recently before I walked in the door, where the docking pilots and the bay pilots had been 2 different entities, and they had merged, and that changed the launch operations, as well as the fact that the Cove Point LNG terminal had come online down by Solomon's Island, and the pilots had to run a pilot launch out of their mid-bay station, which is at Solomon's Island, and that had increased the workload for the crew there, the boat operator crew there at Solomon's Island. So it was an experiment. They were hiring me, they were creating a new position when they hired me. So it was experimental for them, as well as in terms of hiring me as a new person, but also how were they going to use me. I drove the boat out of Annapolis, to help get pilots on and off the ships that were anchored. I drove up and down the road to Solomon's Island 3 or 4 times a week as the LNG ships were coming and going.
Let me interrupt for just a second, just to share with our watchers. Chesapeake Bay roughly is 150 odd miles for the transit between Atlantic and Baltimore, and roughly halfway is this Solomon's Island area where the LNG is, and then there's an anchorage area off of Annapolis below the Chesapeake Bay Bridge near Annapolis. And so those are 2 locations outside of the harbor of Baltimore where pilotage transportation water taxi service is required or needed.
Right.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so I was supervised. They didn't just cut me loose. I definitely, my deckhand was, my supervisor.
Right. Yeah. So as you reflect back on your years with the pilot service, what are some of the highest lights or a highlight that you might share with all of us?
Well, stuff like celebration is always exciting when you get a ton of ships coming in, mostly military ships in that case. We don't do too much with sailboats, or they're not as labor intensive for us. But when they come in, when you get 10 or dozen ships coming in, and I've got to run pilots around, That's a very challenging intellectually to manage my time and my space to figure out how I'm going to move everybody around the harbor. That's pretty exciting.
Well, get into that a little bit. So you're not just taking orders from a dispatcher, you're having to do a lot of your own logistics?
Correct. Yeah, the dispatcher is definitely the puppet master. Big picture, coordinating which pilot is going where, and laying that out. But they actually technically we have a weird situation, I think, in Baltimore, where the pilot office where the dispatcher is a couple of miles inshore away from me and the pilot station where the boats are in the Port of Baltimore. So they are removed actually from the physical geography of the harbor of the Port of Baltimore. So there is definitely some collaboration and some problem solving that I have to do to figure out. I have 3 pilots who need to be moved around, but I have 2 boats. Like, how are we gonna do this? There's definitely some problem solving.
And I imagine there's some mission creep as the inbound pilot is somewhat delayed or some other factor.
Yeah, we don't usually try and delay, but yeah, sometimes it's a matter of who am I gonna, an inbound ship would have a priority, frankly.
Okay.
But yeah, who am I going to inconvenience a little bit sometimes? Which pilot am I going to make a little bit potentially make grumpy? Who can take a little grumpiness this morning?
What can you share with us? Because I only have a general overview. What can you share with us is the pilot structure for Maryland pilots? So you made mention of the fact that there used to be 2 different services, one very local and one for the Bay, and now that's been changed for some time. What is the structure, and how does that previous legacy continue to remain or not now?
It's eroding. They're cross training at this point, so that the new apprentices are trained in both skill sets. They can be the docking master as well as the bay pilot. So the way it works, the division of labor is that, for an inbound ship, for example, a ship arrives at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, and there's pilot launches down there. There are counterparts in Cape Henry, as in Baltimore, and a launch runs out with the bay pilot, who's been staged there specifically. The operations center is definitely in Baltimore. Everything starts and ends in Baltimore. So a pilot has been in Baltimore, perhaps been sent down to Cape Henry specifically to meet an inbound ship. The launch runs out, the pilot climbs up the ladder, brings the ship up the bay, like you said, 150 miles. It can take 15 hours on a slow ship. A fast ride is 8 hours, slow ride is 10 hours or longer. And so when they approach Baltimore, they need a break. They've been at work all day, all night, perhaps through the night. So I run out, I meet them at the Key Bridge or out at North Point on the pilot boat with the docking pilot, who climbs up the ladder and relieves the bay pilot, and then coordinates the tugboats to get the ship safely to the pier. And then it's the reverse process on the departure. Once the ship is underway, safely away from the pier, and the tugs are pointed to the ship in the right direction to get out of the harbor, the docking pilot is done, so they can climb down the ladder, and I run them back ashore. At this point, they've been cross-training long enough, so there's less demand for the pilot launch on the departures. A lot of times, the bay pilot can carry out the function of the docking pilot. It's one person. So they undock the ship, dismiss the tugboats, and proceed down the bay. So there's less work for the launch now for that. Yeah.
So what is the decision tree for multiple pilots on one vessel? I'm thinking, I've read stories in the news or just descriptions of having to have a pair of pilots or so because of the length of time the ship is going to be underway and they need to switch themselves, relieve each other in a sense.
Right.
So what can you share with us that triggers that?
I'm not, I can't tell you specific parameters, but yes, there are certain, if ship is particularly a deep draft, for certain slow ships, just anything where they wouldn't be able to switch out halfway. You know, like I said, we have the mid-bay station at Solomon's Island where we can run a launch out with an additional pilot. If the pilot on the ship requests that, they can get relief halfway. But in certain conditions, that is not doable. In which case, then yes, the rules mandate that 2 pilots are on the ship right off the bat.
I realize this is way out of your field, but what's your fly on the wall sense of the change with the deeper draft and the largest vessels coming in now? Is there any gossip in that area that you can share?
It's like mad respect. Just, you know, you have to have your act together. You have to, you know, have a plan. We have had an operational change recently that affects me, where for the really largest container ship vessels coming into the port now, they want the docking pilot to meet the ship earlier. Which means, you know, I have to run out early for an inbound ship. I might head out like a half hour before I'm supposed to meet them. You know, now it should be more like 45 minutes really before the ship arrives. I need to be heading out so we can have the docking pilot up the ladder on board, taking command way ahead of time.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. Hey, Jeff, you got any questions I haven't addressed?
Sure. Can you share with us some of your more memorable moments driving the pilot boat?
Ice, like I said, the ice was pretty bad. I think it was 2 winters ago. And we had a ship arriving into Sparrows Point, which is the furthest east of the ships that arrive into Baltimore. So it means I have to go out all the way to North Point, really out to the entrance of the Patapsco River. And I really probably shouldn't have gone in hindsight. But I didn't know that at the time. Yeah, it took an hour to get out there. It just was crunching through ice. Yeah, really should have put that pilot on a tugboat.
Wow.
Tugboats, can you take care of this? But they were gone. They were already out there by the time I kind of figured out what was happening. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So kind of going off that a little bit, are there times where an inbound ship, because of the conditions, has to wait in order to get a pilot? Or is there usually some way that you can get a pilot out to them?
Yeah, if they really need to know in Annapolis if that's going to be the case for a lot of the ships. It has to happen. Well, the most obvious thing I can think of is if their berth isn't clear. You know, a lot of times we'll have the ship, you know, knows well ahead of time, obviously, where it's going in the port, and if the previous ship hasn't left yet, you know, if their cargo is taking longer than they thought or whatever, the dispatcher will communicate that to the inbound ship and say, why don't you put the brakes on, wait in Annapolis, and we got to see. We don't know, you know, if we don't know if it'll take an hour, it might take 3 hours. Sometimes that's unknown. That's on the dispatcher usually to communicate that. I definitely do not have the authority to say to a pilot, slow down, Cap. You know, like that's not something you'll hear me say on the radio.
Yeah, right. So, how about some anecdotes about your time with Pride of Baltimore?
I was thinking I missed one right when you asked about how I got on Pride. The ship had just come back from Asia, or no, I'm sorry, winter maintenance. The ship had come back from Asia, and most of that crew had stuck around for winter maintenance. And then I showed up as the oncoming rig up crew, but there was, you know, overlap there. And one of my first days there, we were taking the cover off, and I was outboard, like standing on the bottom railing of the cover and taking plastic off, and it was kind of draping ahead of me as I went. And I stepped, to move ahead, and it happened to be the end of that bottom part of the frame. So I went splash. I went right into Baltimore Harbor, like on my second day.
That's a cold time of the year to choose to go into the harbor.
Mortified. Yes. Well, I hardly went in. I don't even think my head, like, I definitely was immediately like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, and mortified. I was so embarrassed and upset that, and you were there, you were laughing. And there was a bunch of clothing laying around because it was winter maintenance, and there was just, there was clothing there in the shed. So I actually got out of my wet clothes, put on some random dry clothes, and was like, I'm ready to go back to work. I needed to prove myself. I was ready to go. No time for distraction. And you said, no, you need to go take a shower. You and Wes was the mate. You're like, no, everybody was kind of like, you need to go take a shower. Rinse off.
Baltimore Harbor, not the best.
Exactly. It's like, but no, I'm ready to work.
Pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also been reminded, this is the 20-year anniversary of the return, of 2000, obviously. And I did the second part of that trip. I relieved, Zinke McCreary was the second mate, and I relieved him in Oslo, took over as second mate for the return trip. And that was sterling. That was a wonderful experience. I mean, it wasn't all wonderful, but there's some good stories in hindsight.
Well, in fact, that was with Dan Parrott, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think you were on board
for a while.
Did you guys hand off in Ireland?
No. Yes, you guys had that adventure with the gale in Ireland. And
yeah, I thought I was going to be shipwrecked in the harbor. I was like, oh, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, right.
Shipwrecked in the harbor.
Yeah, that was wild. So Pride the second boat was too deep in depth draft to get in where the old boat could get into. So when this southerly gale came up, it put, with two anchors down, it still put a great deal of motion in the harbor, and eventually that pulled away the anchors. And so there was a lot of scrambling going on. But I had delivered the boat to Ireland, and Dan Parrott, as partner captain, was coming on to relieve me. And you guys handled that situation really, really well. Wound up having to motor around for 12 hours to deal with it before things quieted down and you could go back to anchor. But what I was thinking of when I first mentioned Dan Parrott is I was watching the progress of the vessel crossing the Atlantic, going down past, from Madeira down past the Canaries and around. And it was one of the things we read about in stories of crossing westbound in the Atlantic, taking the trades. You got this wonderful high pressure pattern that you run a circle around. And to the layman, it's, why do they make that big detour? And I had crossed in 91 westbound, and it was frustrating. We just didn't have that kind of pattern. And we got into the Virgin Islands with the last 50 gallons of fuel on the boat. So a fair amount of make and break, going sailing, motor sailing, going motoring. But I was very envious of you guys as you roared around this circle of this persistent high, making a great speed, reaching around. So did it get boring?
No, not boring. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, we did. There was a little bit of drama that I recall around food supplies, around provisions, where the cook freaked out a little bit halfway across that he hadn't provisioned well, and he had done fine. It was fine. I was a little bit frustrated that the guest crew knew about it. frankly, there was a little bit of food panic. I felt it was really unprofessional that the guest crew found out about it. But it's a small boat, it's hard to keep secrets. So there was a little bit of a food panic, and we were fine. It just meant a lot of oatmeal, for breakfast. Breakfast gets monotonous, and we didn't have fresh salad the whole way across or whatever. But we weren't in danger in any way. But at one point, in the evening, the sun comes up in the morning, and there's flying fish on deck. And you usually just toss them, but there was one guest crew who was like, "We're saved." Collecting these, and flying fish, for anybody, they're not big. They're
and mostly
7 or 8
bone.
inches. What's that?
And mostly bone. Yeah.
Mostly bone. And
Well,
if we were truly starving, maybe we would not, but we were not starving. We were not in danger.
Actually, when it comes to flying fish, I made a trip as a third pickup crew to two brothers making a transit for a long distance cruise down into the South Atlantic. This is in the winter of 77, 78. And the trip started out of Antigua. And we were going around the Horn of Brazil to get down to Rio. And it was a long fetch towards the east-southeast, mostly Port Tac. And at night, there was about a week there where at night, we would wind up with 6 or 7 or a dozen of these things on board, and we'd throw them in a bucket. We each took a turn. We were by ourselves on the watch, and we'd go fetch these things and throw them in the bucket. And the next morning, we would have flying fish for breakfast, pan-fried stuff. It was really, really good. But the low freeboard of the boat, being only 38 feet on deck, meant that they came aboard with Pride's size. Her freeboard's high enough that it doesn't very often happen with her. Yeah.
We also
panic. Oh my! I never heard that. That was kept a secret.
we also caught a barracuda. Had a fishing line, trolling fishing line astern. And at one point, caught a barracuda. It was right at the change of the watch. Gorgeous day out, sailing along nicely. And it was just standoff on the quarterdeck at the change of the watch between this guest crew was like, "We're saved." Fish. And everybody knows you can't eat barracuda, right? They're poisonous. So it was just standoff on the quarterdeck between the Dan Parrott, who was gonna throw the fish back, and the guest crew, I thought he was crazy, could not understand that we were in danger. We don't have any food, and you're throwing the fish back.
Ciguatera. I think that's what they call that risk, is ciguatera. It's a reef-related feeding problem. It's a thing that I heard about for the first time when I was working in the Caribbean in the late 70s, early 80s. And so, that was a story. So do you remember kind of where along the voyage you picked up the barracuda?
I don't. It must have been closer to this side, closer to as we were approaching Puerto Rico.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. So any other tales out of school? Come on, we got to get some gossip, a Pride gossip going here.
What else? Gosh, I definitely, it was a great experience for sure.
I do have a question from Chris Hope here. There's lots of women who work in the schooner world. In the schooner world, we're about 50-50 guys and girls. Are there many women who work with the pilots?
Not too many. No, it's definitely not as integrated. At this point, we have 3 women in the Maryland State pilots. But it's definitely something that could be better. I frankly keep recruiting Chris Hope to come work with me, so she could be part of the solution.
So how about pilot boat operation? That's probably even rarer, right?
Say that again.
The pilot boat operator, that's probably even rarer to have.
Yeah.
Women.
And I definitely, it's a little bit cringeworthy, but definitely apparently some of the captains who regularly come in know my voice on the radio, and just notice it because it is a woman's voice, and that's rare.
Well, out of the whole marine transportation world, when it comes to commerce, passenger commerce, the big vessels and stuff in the United States, it's tugboats, big ships, all of that stuff. The percentage of women is not nearly what it is in the sailboat world. And so, yeah, so it's not surprising, but it's been changing, and that's, but it takes a great deal of gumption still to go do it, because you're walking into that old class kind of the way things used to be argument.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So Jeff, some more questions or anything you want to volunteer, Chris?
I feel a little bit remiss in a little bit experience that I left out. I spent time in Mystic, Connecticut on the Herreshoff yacht Neath, sailboat Neath. And
Oh yeah, neat. What a sweet thing that is. She went through a big redo and has been the example of what is a classic yacht these days for quite some time.
Yeah, that was formative for me, and you know, Lynn McKess. Lynn had been on my original experience on Spirit of Massachusetts, and then she was the captain on Neath, and she was a mentor, you know, a huge influence on me professionally.
What was that? So that, how did that role play out with joining her on that vessel? What was that like? That was a year-round position.
Yeah, it's laid up in the winter, you know, definitely, but there, you know, varnish. There was so much varnish. There was always stuff to do in the winter. Yeah, but you know, we sailed hard. There was a racing circuit, a classic yacht racing circuit that we participated in. I did that for 3 summers. Yeah, so a lot of time in Newport, in the Long Island Sound. We did go up to Nova Scotia one summer. The boat is well traveled beyond my experience there, but we did go to Nova Scotia one summer. Yeah, it was a hoot. I mean, on the flip side, you know, besides being the mate and the deckhand, since it was a yacht, so like happy hour was another part of a big part of my responsibilities. You know, making sure, you know, Johnny Walker Black Label was the owner's drink of choice, so making sure there was whiskey on board, scotch, and snacks. You know, happy hour was a big part of it. Yeah, different, slightly different from
the small boat version of upstairs, downstairs.
Yeah. Very small boat. Everybody mingles, but somebody has to be in charge of happy hour.
Yeah, I've seen that from afar. I've not actually been a part of that world, but I've seen it from nearby and afar. Yeah,
Brilliant is similar.
Well, in terms of design and construction, her purpose actually is a little bit removed from the classic yacht that you just described, in the sense that they really wanted to do world cruising on that boat. And so the owner that commissioned that vessel's design from very young Olin Stevens was very specific about having a vessel that was going to go around the world, that if it were pitch poled or capsized, that it would come up whole with the lower masts. But if not, all the deck fittings would not have been damaged or torn out of the deck. Mm-hmm. So the designer following the construction, she's one stout vessel, and by comparison, quite heavier for her size and style. So her accommodations down below are all about ocean voyaging, which means everything is narrow. The bunks are narrow, the companionway passage layouts, everything's a hand grab away. Compared to the When and If, the When and If is quite a bit different in her original configuration. I was skipper of her for a little while one summer before she had her misfortunes, and got rebuilt now for a second time some years ago. Anyway, she was much more summertime, even though it was in the intent of the general to go around the world, hence her name, When and If. The layout was less specifically oriented towards going off. So it was more of a summertime layout down below, a bit more spacious, a bit more roomy. So there's an interesting qualitative difference that I can appreciate in those two boats. So the social thing, the business of the engagement between the professional crew and the rest would be, I have the impression that On Brilliant would have been much more equal. It probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as separate as must have been played at aboard Neath.
It wasn't really separate on Neath. The family was very hands-on. They would be definitely misrepresenting the upstairs downstairs thing is
okay.
Fine.
All right.
It really is not representative.
Yeah. That's cool. So
yeah.
Awesome.
You go ahead, Jeff.
Oh no, go ahead, Christine.
I got like two anecdotes I feel like should also get in. One, speaking of Baltimore, Ireland, in 2000, when we were wrestling the anchor, and I definitely have an image in my head of the mate, Chris Blansburg, and we got some fishing gear wrapped in the anchor, which was part of the complicating factor, him swearing his head off down there in the head, down on the head stay there, trying not to cut loose the damage the fishing gear. But you remember, you got waylaid too. They took you to sea on the pilot boat.
I know. Actually, it was the rescue boat. What do they call the RNLI boat? So when Pride was noted from ashore, and I noticed it as quickly as anybody. In fact, Chris Rossum happened to be, who's a past alumnus of the old Pride of Baltimore and is director for the Constellation Museum here. He happened to be making a social visit at the same time that Pride was there, and I was getting off and Dan was getting on. So there's this early morning, we're up having coffee, looking out the window of where we were staying with the O'Flynn's, and that's when we all noticed at the same time Pride drifting away. So when the word went around the harbor, it was an excuse to create a training exercise for the RNLI crew. So I was invited to go along. So sure, I'd go along. And what an interesting experience that was. All the gear you wear, because you're wearing the inflatable life jackets, harnesses, and you're strapped into these seats that are like airplane seats for the pilots, and armrest and headrest included. And you're in this glassed-in midships pilot area, and there's like 6 or so people on the boat, including myself. So it's not a spacious experience. It's all packed in because it's designed for dealing with really rough conditions. So when it became apparent that Pride was not going to need any assistance and had everything under control, they checked in with their dispatch and said, okay, we're going to go outside and check out what's things like that. So we're, it's just a 22 knot boat. 18 to 22, I can't remember what her speed was. And so the southerly gale is setting these big rollers coming in, and we're going out, zoom, zoom. Yeah, it was quite the show. Yeah, that was quite the experience. My eyes in my head were big watching how I react to it, because I'm a bit sensitive in my history with seasickness, but it wasn't a thing. I was so engaged with what was going on. That was fascinating. So when they went out, we all went out and then came back in again and checked with how Captain Parrott and the gang were doing. So and then retired the boat and hauled her back out of the water again up into that station house they have. That was cool. So that must have been interesting to see from the ship, watching the RNLI boat running around.
We had our hands full. I can't say I was too focused.
Yeah.
My other significant memory from 20 years ago was then the homecoming from Puerto Rico, from San Juan back to Baltimore, where we were supposed to be home in time for Thanksgiving, but we got our asses kicked off Hatteras. Ended up having to heave to and just wait for the weather to die down.
Yeah,
So
that was a cold front. I remember watching that and being in communication with Dan Parrott, because that was an ability that the ship had even back then, was messaging back and forth. And I was able, by being ashore, to watch the way the weather was going. And yeah, that was a significant cold front, and it was probably a race he was working with in terms of getting inshore of the Gulf Stream. And can't recall the details, whether or not it was just not possible or not. But anyway, the cold front came in and it was going to be sharp. And so, yep, just chill, take things down and wait.
Thanksgiving at sea. We had Thanksgiving. We were supposed to be in Baltimore, but we didn't make it.
Right. Yeah, I've had a delay coming up at that time of the year myself for other reasons. We wound up in '96 with a tropical wandering around south of Puerto Rico. We were in Puerto Rico. Bob Glover had brought her across from Europe, and I had relieved him in Puerto Rico. We wound up an extra week in Puerto Rico waiting for that tropical to sort itself out, because there's always that concern that once it gets going, its path is going to be north between northwest and northeast, and probably north to start with before it winds off going to Europe. And no one knew if it would really generate into something. So it was best to just stay put, because otherwise we might be partway north of Puerto Rico and have this bowling ball come headed our way. So we hung out. So we came back late. And I can remember on another return at that time of the year, having a motor sail race with a cold front coming in, and we were able to beat it and get into the lee of the East Coast, so we didn't suffer any big seas. So yeah, it can be adventurous in the fall coming north from the south. So yeah, that was wild. I remember Dan talking about it. It was well, how comfortable did the boat get? What did you recall about what you guys did to ride that out?
We hove too. I think we had the second reef in the main, and just waited. It was very comfortable. Yeah.
I found that with her windage up forward, that, and I've shared this since learning it and experimenting it with myself in the early years of the second boat, is that if you put any portion of main up as well as a headsail, which it would be something abstractly one would be tending to do to try to have some kind of control to the yaw of the vessel responding to the wind, is that the result is she always lays kind of downwind. And so she hoves to within ranges of pretty wide range, best if you only put the main on her, and you can reduce that yaw. It's still a fair amount of yawing, but you can reduce it down a lot. I've hove to with the boat in smaller seas, like 8 to 10 foot seas, 6 to 8 to 10 foot seas off of Florida with a northerly, with just the whole main. Just let her sit there with the whole main, and she rounds up a bit, and then she settles back and rounds up again. But the yaw has got to be 45 to 60 degrees. It's a little bit frustrating, because if you put a little headsail up forward, she'd immediately lay a hull, lay a beam, and it'd be a really wild ride. So yeah, it's but other than that, she's a nice sea riding hull, as you relate. So cool.
Yeah.
One final question here that just came in. Just curious, which Bay Pilot mug is Christine using?
Oh, good question. This one is from 2007. It is, okay, let's see. Christmas at the Pilot Station, 1932. It's some apprentices, oh, am I holding it right? Apprentices rowing a Christmas tree out to this pilot boat, which was the station, considered the station back then. Yeah, Brian Hope is a retired pilot at this point, but he does artwork every year, and they make a mug.
Yeah, we have several as well. They're a great collection.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, Christine. It's been awesome having you.
My pleasure.
And thank you for all of you that have donated. That helps keep this program going. And if you guys are still interested in ornaments or other Pride gear, things like hats, t-shirts, go to our website, pride2.org, and all of that is available there. Captain Miles, do you have any parting words for us?
Other than saying thank you to Christine for joining us, what a fascinating story and a great demonstration of the life choices one makes. Sometimes it's an accident, sometimes it's a trip, and that can end up so wonderfully. But otherwise, for all of us, please remain diligent.